So the In One Ear blog has always been kind of a catch-all blog. It has addressed political and social issues, comic books, movies, and so on. And now movies kind of got removed, but otherwise In One Ear has remained kind of just whatever's on my mind outside of movies. One of the semi-regular features I've had is the Christian music that doesn't suck. And the whole thing was meant to kind of show bands that were outside of the mainstream knowledge of what is in Christian music and what might actually be interesting for people to listen to. And now, for a little background, I grew up in church, and while my parents were not certainly as strict as some, they did try and steer me certain ways, especially in the kind of entertainment. And they had instilled a love for music, and even that was a lot of, in the early days, like Christian kid music. But my love of music just kind of tended to grow deeper and deeper as I got older. Around junior high, as I was exposed to more music, my parents didn't like outright ban rock music. My sister and I listened to the radio all the time, but when it came to purchasing music, well, my mom and dad basically made a deal with me. Now, if I wanted quote-unquote secular music, in other words, you know, the music that was on the radio, if I wanted that music, I had to find my own way to get it. But if I wanted to get Christian bands, they were willing to buy that for me. And they'd pretty much buy whichever bands I wanted without question, which caused me to dive headlong into Christian music. Now, if you read my writings or watch these videos and think I'm insufferable now, you would have just totally dug teenage Christian me. As an example, one year several churches brought in Al Minconi, and he spoke against rock music, but unlike a lot of his contemporaries, he was actually pretty full on for Christian rock, so there was always a part of his seminar where he'd talk about bands the kids might dig. But, you know, in the seminar, he talked about all the mainstays, especially the metal bands, because the metal bands were the scary ones. At one point, a guy from my youth group said, "Man, they named all my favorite bands." And I, being a smug little prick, turned around and said, "Maybe that should tell you something." I was adorable. Now, the church railing against rock and roll was nothing new, but what started to change in the early 80s is that the culture was a little more out of step. So mainstream culture could be swayed to be afraid of quote-unquote more extreme bands, your Motley Crues, your Slayers, but stuff like Elvis and the Beatles just no longer seemed all that bad. Growing up in Minnesota, I was right at the heart of the anti-rock crusades. We had these local guys who became national called the Peters Brothers. They gained notoriety by promoting these gatherings where repentant teens would bring their secular music CDs to be destroyed, and they'd have like bonfires and steamrollers and all sorts of dramatic ways for kids to destroy the CDs that they would later have to buy again. I think Christian anti-rock crusaders helped keep rock in business by having kids trash their music and then have to go out and buy it again later. Now, the Peters Brothers had multiple books. Probably their most famous was Why Knock Rock, but they weren't really alone. Bob Larson had several anti-rock books. Jacob Aranza popularized things like backward masking fears. And in the early days, most of these guys joined Jeff Godwin, who denounced all rock and pop as the devil's music, including early Christian rock music. Now, most of these guys came around on Christian music, and many started to have these, if you like, well then you'll like comparison charts. Some weren't half bad, but some were pretty awful. Because I can promise you, if you liked Metallica, you're probably not going to be that interested in Petra as a substitute. On his radio show, Bob Larson once told a girl who said she really liked the music of Susie and the Banshees, "We gotta get you some One Bad Pig." This is Susie and the Banshees. This is One Bad Pig.
You'd have to see it to believe it still, 'cause what is true?
A little more background on that. I actually sent that girl a couple Christian music mixtapes through the show, and then we corresponded outside the show a bit, which actually started my questioning of just how trustworthy Bob Larson was as a minister of God. And if you've seen where he's at now, it's a safe bet to think he's gone off the rails. At last I saw, he had this show where he was running around with teenage girl exorcists, casting out demons. That's not creepy. But that's another story for another time. And anyways, yeah, she did not dig One Bad Pig. Now me, as I said, I threw myself just wholeheartedly into Christian music. It really was almost all I listened to. I kind of just gave up the radio more or less. I would tape songs off the radio. That's how I had any secular music. But I began with artists and groups like Steve Taylor, The Choir, Daniel Amos, the Res Band, Rick Kua, and eventually I just kept branching out, and I went into metal, the Christian metal scene, the Christian alternative scene, and even hip-hop. Yes, there is Christian hip-hop. And for a while I worked at a Christian bookstore, and one of my coworkers, she had a husband who was like just way into music, even more than I was at that point. And he had a ridiculously huge collection of early Jesus music. And so I was finding these artists like Randy Stonehill, Larry Norman, and, there's the list is actually quite large of how many artists there were. I don't think people always understand just how far back the whole Christian scene goes for music. Now, the perception of Christian rock in the public has never really changed much. I mean, heck, even within Christian music circles, mainstream Christian contemporary music tends to be viewed as 10 years behind the times. And part of this, funny enough, is due to the bands that achieved success outside of Christian music in the 80s. Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, Stryper, and later Jars of Clay largely represented what the public would come to know. And these artists, they had hits. In fact, in spite of the fact that they're the source of much ridicule, people actually listened to Stryper and bought their CDs. Stryper had hit singles. But I think part of the problem of the perception and the negative feelings towards that is that, well, it's just kind of weird. Christian media is pretty much the only religion-based genre of entertainment where it's, actually got that in the title. You don't hear about Muslim rock. And it's not that Christian bands are unique in having message-based material. I mean, plenty of bands have messages in their music. So that's not really, in and of itself, the issue. And Christian music is hardly unique in the number of terrible musicians and bands. But early on, Christian music was so focused on its message that over time the music became reduced to a mere tool, and bands would actually talk about it as just a tool for their message. It's just the vehicle they're using. They didn't really care about the music. And there's a lot of Christian music that you listen to it and you go, yeah, you can tell that they were just trying to cash in on a sound. And some of those bands made a lot of money from the Christian community. Far more than most of the bands I listened to, anyways. So what happened then is a lot of Christian music got built around a fan base that really was looking at the message, and they wanted to have it be very simple and straightforward. They didn't want to be challenged. They didn't want songs that made it sound like life could still be tough if you had Jesus. And this forced a lot of us to start exploring deeper. So while my philosophies now are quite different from when I was a teenager and a college kid listening to Christian alternative, metal, hip-hop, and so on, there are bands that I still listen to, just like I do with any band not from Christian music that I like. I don't listen to every single non-Christian band. So here I am planning to resurrect the Christian music that doesn't suck from the dead in this video essay form, or I don't know if video essay is the correct term. And you might ask why I would want to retread the topic, why go back over it. Really, I feel that the topic is one that can benefit from a new medium outside of text, a new approach. So I'm going to cover the bands that I had covered previously, but also I will be throwing in new bands. One reason for this is it really allows me to weave the artist's music into the videos in a fashion that the text was just limited by. Yeah, I could, I could link to YouTube videos maybe of live, or if I could find songs, but I just like the idea of it being woven into the meat of the essay. Oh, and of course you'll get my beautiful voice as a bonus. Keep an eye out in the near future for the first episode of Christian Music That Doesn't Suck, the video edition.